I'll speak in English in honor of our guest speaker, Professor Sahashi. And good evening, everybody. We are in three different time zones today. I'm in Cleveland, Ohio. Luis Augusto is in Rio, Brazil. And Professor Sahashi is way ahead of us in, in Tokyo. So let me start by thanking the institutions that make it possible made it possible to organize this event tonight. Special thanks to Conselho Empresarial Brasil-China and also to SEBRI, Ambassador Luis Augusto, who served in Beijing and Tokyo as Brazilian ambassador, is here both representing SEBRI and Conselho Empresarial Brasil-China. And special thanks for Professor Sahashi, who was so generous as to make the time to be here today with us very early in the morning in Tokyo. I presume Professor Sahashi had to waken up today earlier than normally, eat breakfast in a rush to be here with us today in this impressive setting, which is the backdrop is the main library of the University of Tokyo. But there is a caveat. It's not the real one, right? This is just a digital backdrop, but it looks incredibly beautiful and an impressive setting, very appropriate for the kind of conversation that we're going to have uh, today. Let me briefly introduce Professor Sahashi, who, in spite of being a young professional, is associate professor at the University of Tokyo, where he's also a member of the Future Vision Research Institute. He has been a visiting professor in leading universities abroad, such as Stanford University in the US and Instituto Tecnológico Mexicano in Mexico. He is an expert on international relations and politics in East Asia. And it's worth to mention his most recently book, whose title is very inspiring and has a very nice fit to the conversation we're going to have today. The title is the following: Search for Coexistence, the US and the Two Chinas During the Cold War. I think it's hard to imagine a more timely moment to hold that kind of seminar on the subject we're focusing today. Um, since I guess the end of the Vietnam War in the mid 70s, or maybe back in the mid 50s during the Korean War, there has been no moment in which East Asia has experienced such a geopolitical tension as the one it experiencing today. And the geopolitical tension in the region is, as everybody knows, a reflex of the growing tensions between the US and China. It might be an overstatement to say that China and the US are already engaged in a Cold War. But one thing is certain, East Asia is the hottest spot in the context of a growing tensions between the US and the in China. And the how this will play out in the future will determine it to a great extent the shaping of the international system going forward. There can be hardly anyone else in a with the necessary knowledge to tackle this complicated issue than Professor Sahashi. I will ask Professor Sahashi just 1 minute more to show and to thank the companies that sponsor the annual program of seminars of Fundação Fernando Henrique Cardoso before I hand over to him to have the floor. I would like to thank each and all of the companies whose trademarks are shown in the screen in front of us. Thank you so much. Professor Sahashi, without further ado, the floor is yours. As we have agreed, you will have like 15 to 20 minutes for your initial remarks. Then Ambassador Luis Augusto will make comments. And then we're going to start a conversation. I will try to moderate a conversation and intersperse the conversation with questions asked by the public. By the way, if those who are attending this meeting want to ask questions, you please write in, preferably in English, through the chat, right? Questions will be selected. Sometimes there is not enough time to ask all the questions which are conveyed to us, but we're going to do our best to contemplate most of the questions presented. So the floor is yours, Professor Sahashi. Thank you so much on behalf of the Fundação Fernando Henrique Cardoso.
Thank you very much for kind introduction. My name is Ryo Sahashi. This is my great pleasure to see you, and good evening for all of you. And actually, I was in Brasilia, Sao Paulo, and Rio de Janeiro for 3 weeks, just before the COVID. And I was then the visiting professor at the Brasilia University. So it is my great pleasure to come back to Brazil via Zoom technology, but this is my great pleasure. And today, I want to talk about my own interpretation about US-China rivalry, and also Japan's position on that, which might have a big implication for Brazil and for Latin America. So I don't have many slides, just to give my ideas. But just before going to that, before going to the very detail, just let me share one or two my take from the recent events. Just a few weeks ago, we had this one. This is, I don't know, they use Zoom or WebEx or anything, but we had online meeting between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden. And you remember this very well, I believe. It was broadcasted very well, and they didn't create any joint communique, but they each publish kind of the position paper from White House and from Chinese government. And, at least we can say they had some conversation or talk. But, just yesterday, United States White House announced they will not send any government official to Beijing Olympic. So what happened last few weeks? Everybody just surprised, this event. I mean, this procedure, right? Just a few weeks ago, they had warm conversation, it looks like, but now they start to have more, how can I say, very cool down moment. So I think this is a reality of US-China relations now, even though sometimes they have conversation. But that conversation never means the kind of the friendship between two countries. They have conversation only for conversation without any substantial outcome. And, repeatedly, they have a lot of problems relating to human rights, relating to power rivalry, relating to high-tech technology. So I really think, US-China rivalry or competition or confrontation will continue in coming decades. But this is very new. Looking back past 40 years or 50 years, US-China relations was really good. And Washington, I mean, American government, tried to say our policy is engagement with China. And the essence of US engagement is, firstly, accept Chinese governance as communist regime. And secondly, they try to support Chinese modernization. Actually, I'm still young. I'm still 43 years old. But like my generation people, my friend, many of my friends living in China, but my friend Chinese, just like 45 years ago, was not so rich like now, right? Even in Shanghai, the very gorgeous city in China, their life was really tough. Everyone, wear the same costume, and the food was not so good. But now you can see, like, if you go to Shanghai, Beijing, any cities in, the big cities in China, you will be amazed by how rich they are, right? So, but that richness, that gorgeousness of Chinese economy was partly, but significantly created by support for modernization from the United States and from the world. The United States was really, I can say, generous, I believe, to open up their society to Chinese scientists, Chinese company, Chinese government, right? And they had, I mean, American people have big expectation. China will become like us. China will be market economy. China will have more political reform. China will contribute more to international order. That expectation was really big on American side, and Chinese people really know that very well, right? So it was happy marriage for 40 years or 50 years. But what happened now is United States lost their expectation on China side. And Chinese people, especially the politicians, really know United States changed their attitude. So we can describe the situation between US and China as distrust. Not mistrust, distrust, right? They both keep the very high level of distrust on each other, and they both really believe counterparts. So for United States, China, and for Chinese people, United States, counterparts try to weaken their power. So this is a big change. This is a totally 180% degree change of the relationship between US and China. And this is my take on US-China relations today. This is really deep-seated rivalry between two countries. And globalization. Globalization make everybody's life very, happy and also rich last 30 years after the end of the Cold War. But just looking back that, globalization and rising China and US-China relations in a very friendship terms, everything were coupled to each other. I mean, under globalization, China became the factory for the world, and Chinese people got richer, and we all also enjoy the globalization. But I think that combination, globalization, US-China friendship relationship, and interdependence on each other, that process also, how can I say, was prevented. I mean, is now being prevented from US-China confrontation. So I think that this is a really big change today we have. And the second point, I only have 3 points, but the second point I want to emphasize is how we Japanese see this situation. Some people say, oh, Japan is really hawkish against China. You know, we have a lot of problems between Japan and the United States, between Japan and China. So Japan should really be happy with such a tough American hardline approach on China. You may imagine, but that is not true, right? Of course, we have a lot of trouble with Chinese government in historical perception, in our understanding of territory. But at the same time, China is neighbor, and China is source of growth for Japanese economy. You know, if you have interview with Japanese company to ask like this question, so your company can survive without any access to Chinese market? Most companies' answer is no, we cannot survive, right? Or just look at our prime minister or foreign minister's response yesterday to the US announcement on diplomatic boycott on Beijing Olympic. Their answer, I mean, our prime minister and foreign minister's answer is still, how can I say, in the process to make answer, right? They cannot reply with 100% confidence, right? Because they know, you know, our position is really, really difficult. We have very keen interest on human rights abuse in China, but at the same time, they know what we know. The relationship between China and Japan is really important. So, you know, this is, I think, very important understanding. Japan is really status quo power for international order, in my own opinion, right? Japan is, of course, very sometimes looks hawkish on Chinese aggression on maritime security or cyber security, right? We know the problems caused by Chinese government. So we sometimes be hard on, you know, on Chinese action or behaviors. But that never means, you know, we simply try to cut down our relationship with China, right? Answer is opposite. So in different way, we can say Japan is stability seeker. You know, for Japan, most important thing is stability. How to stable the region and the globalized world is very important. So even though, you know, like say, in my own opinion as professor, even though Japan sometimes, you know, be very tough on China, but they never give up engagement with China. They try to exchange and maintain the dialogue to elaborate on the difference over goals, preference, and behavior. The government try to induce China into regional and global order. So some American hawkish people say, oh, Japan and United States should decouple China from global market. But I think, you know, that is not consensus view here, right? So I think, you know, but Japan knows the problem, but Japan answer to the problem might be very different from your own imagination, I believe. So this is my own interpretation of Japanese diplomacy in the past or even today. But I only have a few minutes to go. But let me conclude by saying how Japan should go or will go from now on to the future if US-China competition take place in coming decade. for me, this is actually my very personal opinion and interpretation. But for me, this approach, Japan try to behave as stability seeker, is not good. Even though I say Japan try to behave as stability seeker and try to engage with China always. But for me as professor or commentator of foreign affairs in Japan, this is not enough. Because the challenge from China is very different from the past. And if we don't change our behavior, and if we don't take the stronger position with other countries in the world, we cannot sustain international order as we prefer. Because the problem caused by rising China is not only by the change of balance of power. Yes, China is really big now, but the problem is not only by the changing balance of power. More important change is Chinese government start to be really tough in their social control within Chinese border. But at the same time, they try to and also try to keep the high influence over the world in many countries' political regimes. I really don't think this is a good thing. And also, we have a really big doubts on human rights in mainland China. This is not, maybe you want to, some of you want to say, oh, this is internal affairs. No, human rights issue is universal things, right? Internal affairs, the excuse as internal affairs cannot be sustained in front of human rights abuse, right? So I really believe, against such a big challenge from the China, I think, if Japan or any other country like Brazil only take the foreign policy to manage the relationship with China, we simply lost international order. So this is, again, let me confirm, this is my very personal opinion. But if we keep silence on human rights abuse, or even the abuse of international economic law, like government subsidy or enforcing technology transfer on foreign companies, we cannot keep our economic growth. So for that sake, we really need a pressure. So that is this is the reason, I am not so much satisfied with the past approach now shown in front of you, right? And of course, Japan is in the forefront of US-China confrontation because we are situated in East Asia. But I think this is a problem for all countries, including Brazil. The power from China, the changing balance of power, but also the influence or coercion rooted by the rising Chinese power now creates problems for all international order. So I think, we really have to think again and again, what is our best approach in the time of rising China? If we keep silence, we simply lost international order as we prefer. if we only love stability, we will not keep our stability in the future. So I think a US-China confrontation or rivalry or competition will last in coming decade at least. But if this is the true, I think we have to think very seriously, how can we maintain international order? And for that sake, we have to go beyond the conventional wisdom. Only to keep our own interest might not keep our interest in the future. So I think I speak about 20 minutes, so this is my time. So thank you very much, and I hope my message could be conveyed to you.
Thank you so much for your thought-provoking presentation and for candidly sharing your own personal opinion about the subject matter that we are addressing today. So now it's the time for Ambassador Luis Augusto to make comments on Professor Sahashi presentation. The floor is yours, Luis Augusto.
Well, thank you very much. I must say that it's an honor for me not only to be part of this event hosted by the EFHC Institute, but also in the presence of Professor Sahashi, which is a much more prepared to the understandings of the international order. But I will try to make some comments, take into consideration what he has said and other ideas that I have dealt with over the past few years. He spoke about international order. Perhaps the main characteristics of international order nowadays is instability and accelerated transition. We are seeing an international order characterized by a divided United States of America, Russia seeking revenge for the tragedy that has abated upon them after the end of the Cold War. Europe, and mainly the European Union, a bit lost. The pandemics acting as sort of a catalyst in bringing about more instability to the international order. So we can see a number of issues that make us an almost impossible task trying to devise what do we want for our foreseeable future. Professor Sahashi mentioned that stability is a must. Well, I agree with him. Stability makes the world more predictable and greatly facilitates the decision making on part of our leaders. But it's very difficult to find out to seek some sort of stability in a world in the accelerated transition and marked by instability. And we must add to all that, after the Cold War, is perhaps the most important phenomenon in international order is the emergence of China. China is now the second largest economy in the world, about to become the first largest economy in a few years from now on. And that, of course, brings about a new remaking of the order as such. And a few points have been made about the existence or not of a Cold War. Are we living through a new Cold War between the US and China, as we had the Cold War between the US and the late Soviet Union? My answer to that is no. The Cold War was a zero-sum game in which the gains from one side correspond to losses of the other side, except for the competition between the Soviet Union and the United States in the nuclear field and the most powerful weapons of each side. There was no cooperation at all between the US and the Soviet Union. That is certainly not the case in the relationship between the United States of America and China. Despite their problems, and sometimes they have very serious disagreements, US and China greatly cooperate on a number of issues, mainly in economic field, commercial field. A part of the high-tech production of American firms are made in China. And China has become, not only for the United States, but also for Japan, the manufacturing platform for post-industrial countries such as the US and Japan, a highly post-industrial country. So I wouldn't say that there is a Cold War between America and China, because they would, both sides would lose quite a lot in this respect. So this is something very important. And then we come to another point, which has to do with how Japan sees the situation in East Asia, if I may say so. The situation in East Asia has a number of problems which are remnants of World War II, problems which were not solved by World War II, and today are issues, important negative issues in the international order. I would mention the Korean Peninsula is far from having any solution. The question of Taiwan, the issue of Taiwan, the dispute between Japan and China over the islands that the Japanese call Senkaku and the Chinese call Jiaoyu. The Paracel Islands, the sovereignty of the Paracel Islands, and the maritime frontier in the South China Sea, which involves the Philippines, which involves Vietnam, and so on and so forth. And also I should also add perhaps some problems that remain in the Russian-Japanese border, the islands that were lost in World War II. I would say that what China is preaching over a number of years after they have made their debut in international scenario is some sort of neo-moral doctrine for East Asia, Asia for the Asians. What they want is try to give some sort of solution or some sort of dealings with those pending problems which has to have to do with East Asian countries. And because according to the Chinese, these problems are a good justification for keeping America's presence in East Asia. And that's perhaps the most important issue as far as the Chinese are concerned. So therefore, I think that in this case, in this respect, the situation of the United States presence in East Asia will be in a way greatly affected by an eventual lasting peace and cooperation between Japan and China. China thinks that Japan has a historical liability vis-a-vis, not only vis-a-vis China, but also vis-a-vis many others East Asian countries, which were inherited by the time of the imperialist Japan, and which was destroyed by the World War II. But the remnants are there and have to be dealt with. And this is perhaps one of the issues that the United States are greatly concerned about, because for them, for the US, perhaps the worst thing affecting their presence in East Asia would be a lasting peace and cooperation between Japan and China. It would mean a sort of an understanding between the second largest economy and the third largest economy, being Japan a very post-industrial, fully developed country, and China in a sort of accelerated pace towards that same destination. So that's how I see the situation now, which is pushing the United States into forging or reinforcing their alliances in the region. And one of the examples, for instance, is the Four Eyes deal between Britain, the United States, India, and Japan, which of course has a bias, anti-China bias in this respect. So, and on the other hand, we see on the part of China an extraordinary effort to try to convince its neighbors that they should cooperate, not for reinforcing or strengthening Chinese position as such, but mainly to try to strengthen what the Chinese say, to strengthen the East Asian countries vis-a-vis non-Asian countries, namely vis-a-vis the United States of America. So this is the situation how I see. And the point is that the emergence of China is here to stay. Of course, the pandemics and the phenomenon which led to the election of President Trump in the United States brought about some sort of a semi-halting in the globalization process. But it's not a total halt in the globalization process. There are some global value chains perhaps will take another form, will be more limited to a certain extent, but some markets will remain globalized, such as the commodities market and other important aspects of the functioning of the world economy. So therefore, we have a number of challenges before us. I mean, the world has a number of challenges before us. We are in an accelerated and unstable transition, and the new international order, which will come because the design of the world today is totally different from that we had in 1945, when the Western powers were able to prevail over the Axis and create international order which was based on American values, on Anglo-Saxon values, and this nowadays is no longer perhaps valid as a universal value as such. So therefore, the point is what the East Asian countries will decide among themselves and how they will see whether they can be part of a globalized world as East Asian countries, or whether non-East Asian countries will treat the matter so that Asian countries are still divided, and therefore creating a space for those Western countries to remain, to keep their presence there in East Asia, namely the US. But that's perhaps my view. Well,
all right.
I think I've spoken too much.
No. Excellent, and thought-provoking as well comments, Luis Augusto. I already have a stack of questions sent by the public here, but I would like to give Professor Sahashi like 5 minutes to comment on Ambassador Luis Augusto comments that I think would be nice to for the two of you to have a sort of dialogue, and then we will start the Q&A. Professor Sahashi, back to you.
Yeah, Ambassador, thank you very much for your thoughtful comments. And too many points, I really agree. And also your last point on is there any space for non-Asian countries in the future of Asia? That is very provoking. And but I have no answer for that. But yeah, thank you very much again. And just let me clear about my points. International order is now in crisis, not only in Asia, but also in the world. And I really agree with your points. divided US. United States is divided in politics. European Union is disunited. These leading powers now create the instability of international order. And in addition to that, changing balance of power, rising China, rising India, and rising other countries, of course, including Brazil. The changing balance of power also create the transition of international order. But what I really wanted to emphasize is, in the change of international order, we have to go back to the basic of principle and norms of international order. That is value, like human rights, democracy, rule of law. These values are really important, a principle to underpin the international order, which we can gain, we can prosper together, right? And in the time of this changing international order, we sometimes forget about the importance of values, and we tend to, in the past, we only appreciate the harmony of member states. Looking back 19th century or early 20th century, how leading power behaved, they try to have conference, and try to accept and accommodate rising powers in the international order. And what happened? Wars, and war, right? I think, if only stick to realpolitik or, the idea to accommodate rising powers, we simply lost international order we prefer. So this is my main point. So we have to go back to international norms or rule making. Even in economy, what we really have to do is coming back to multilateral international negotiation, but based on strong rule, right? So having said that, at the same time, I don't fully agree with the United States position on China. This is my very important point, so let me emphasize this one too, right? Some people in the United States speak too much on, say, Chinese fear on China. And they actually, say, I can say, prisoner of militarism. And, but the military or use of force is not always the answer to the problem of rising China or international order. But they do emphasize use of force and necessity to increase defense budget in United States and other countries. But I think, this is not the right approach, right? So, but we have to go beyond such a militaristic thinking, way of thinking. But still, even go beyond militarism, we have to find out the problem of international order. So this is my point, right? So if United States only stick to militarism idea, I believe they will lose their presence in Asia or in the world, right? And also, if United States keep losing their interest in rule making, including Trans-Pacific Partnership, but also in other very important international negotiation on trade liberalism, they also will simply lose their influence in the world, right? So actually, even though, I might sound very hawkish on China or international order, but I have very big worries on the United States. First, they sometimes, be very much militaristic. And second, their internal politics, domestic politics is now against trade liberalism or any rule making in the world. So they may lose the influence, diplomatic influence in the world. So in that sense, I really believe the partnership among countries like Japan, Brazil and Japan are really important in underpinning the international order as we prepare. So this is my initial response to Ambassador's excellent comments. But of course, I have to respond to many questions you raised about like maritime security and Taiwan and Korea and the Cold War rhetoric. But I think I can respond in the other Q&A session.
Yeah. Well, as you can imagine, there are lots of questions about what would be the reaction of Japan if China invades Taiwan, right? I would like you to address this a specific topic, but in more general terms, Professor Sahashi, I would like you to comment on something that you've mentioned implicitly, at least, that you said that Japan is a stabilization seeker. And you alluded to the fact that China might be interfering now into the internal affairs of other countries. You kind of said that China is deliberately trying to destabilize democratic regimes in other countries in general and in East Asia in particular. How concerned you are about this issue in broader terms, and specifically, how would be the reaction of Japan if the mounting pressures on Taiwan from China turns out to materialize in an actual invasion of the island?
Even beyond Taiwan, China having a really big influence now over many democracies in Asia, in the world. I think, now the very important thing for Japan and for international, community is how to assist or support democratic form of governance in Asia and in the world, right? Many countries now experience democracy backsliding, right? Democratic backsliding, we say. Looking around Asia, like Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, their, form of governance is now backsliding, right? Or looking at Indochina Peninsula, Vietnam's, governance is, of course, very socialistic. Myanmar, of course, backsliding, after military coups. And Thai has many problems, in governance. So I think, and China's influence sometimes works in, these countries. But at the same time, they also have their own local problems. So we really need to assist the governance, democratic form of governance in many parts of Asia. And also at the same time, we have to push back against a foreign influence, from outside in these countries. And Taiwan is, now kind of showcase of foreign governance influence operation, right? If you take a look at many reports on Taiwan politics, you can find out many good examples of foreign governance or foreign agents influence operation in Taiwan's elections process. So I think now, they try to, Taiwanese local government try to push back against such an influence operation. But we have to get a lesson from this one, right? And about Taiwan, in general, I don't think, we will have military crisis over Taiwan or other small islands in coming years. my view, it might be against some international reporting, but many specialists here agree it might be unlikely to see a military crisis over Taiwan Strait in coming years, right? But in the long run, the military balance between United States, Taiwan, and China side might be preferable on China side. So we have to push back against this trend. And from Japanese perspective, if something happened in Taiwan Strait, naturally, very naturally, many parts of Japan might get involved. Because, in military sense, it is very likely the red side, I mean, the challenger's side might attack many parts of US forces on Japan. And also self-defense forces airports in Japan. So now I think at least this year, it is now very popular. How could we prepare against such a scenario? And the basic presumption or hypothesis is we naturally get involved if Taiwan contingency happens. And somehow we are now having a new legal platform on our peace constitutions. We have a lot of things we can do together with US forces. So they are now thinking, how can we prepare well? But the most important thing they want to do is by suggesting this long list of cooperation to deter the future aggressions against the Taiwan Strait.
Thank you so much for this comprehensive answer to the question. Back to you, Luis Augusto. What is your my interpretation of your initial remarks? I might be wrong. You correct me if I'm wrong. But in a nutshell, you said that China emergence is a given, is a fact, that sooner or later, maybe sooner than later, China will have the global leadership. And in this context, countries in East Asia in general, and Japan in particular, have no alternative but to accept peacefully the new balance of power, the new balance of global power, and Chinese leadership within the frame of a new moral doctrine to the region. First, is this a fair interpretation of your initial remarks? And if it is so, how do you think that Professor Sahashi is point of view is not it's normative oriented but lacks in real politics grounding, or not?
Well, I will start my comments on what Professor Sahashi said, that Japan, as far as international order is concerned, is a stability seeker. And I fully agree with him. Japan is a stability seeker. Another point that I would like to put forward is the fact that every emerging power, when they are successful in their emergence efforts, they are also stability seekers because they are happy with the environment that permits them to emerge and become one of the most powerful countries in the world. That's the case of China in recent times. So the Chinese are also stability seekers. Maybe that the most, aggressive stance on the part of the Chinese is to get rid of the US presence in East Asia, not to get rid of other East Asian countries, quite on the contrary. And I know that in recent times, And of course, this was prevented from happening because of the pandemics, because of the Trump government in the US. But in recent times, the Japan-China relation was never been so good as they were in recent times. So even people, some people told of some sort of a treaty that might be signed between Japan and China, which is not on the table anymore, given the international crisis that we are going through. So therefore, I see that in the question of Taiwan, that China would be the last one to envisage the possibility of invading Taiwan. They want to become more powerful, and they want to have other Asian countries rallying, not only rallying with China, but also not being aggressive towards China. So the Chinese consider that the question of Taiwan will be eventually solved. It may take 50 years, it may take 100 years, but the relationship between Taiwan and China is certainly very intense in the economic, commercial, and financial fields. And there are a number of perhaps positions, a number of actions which perhaps only happen in Asia. The political leaders in Taiwan meet their counterparts in Beijing, but not as the representatives of the Republic of China and of the People's Republic of China, because they consider themselves that they are the only China, be it Beijing or be it Taipei. But they meet and negotiate between themselves as leaders of political parties that are recognized in both countries, the Kuomintang in Taiwan and the Communist Party, of course, in China. And they have the cures, those meetings take place in the city of Sun Yat-sen, which is the hero of both Chinas. So therefore, what my point is that China is also a stability seeker. China is very confident in the fact that they will become perhaps not the most powerful, if we think of military terms, but certainly the most powerful, not to censor, country in the world, the most populous and the most advanced country in economic and technological terms. And for them, stability is a must. Otherwise, they would have to divert their resources to fighting enemies that they don't want to happen. So that is perhaps my view of the question. And the difficulties are how they will be able to gather all East Asian countries and solve their remaining liabilities, which many Asian countries accuse Japan of being of having caused those liabilities. But the point is that perhaps the issue at stake nowadays is the leadership, the world leadership of the United States of America. The US cannot exercise that leadership alone anymore. They need allies. They need not only the Anglo-Saxon allies, but they also need India, which was sympathetic to the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And they need, of course, the cooperation of Japan, which is perhaps the most developed country in East Asia.
Let me jump into the conversation. Professor Sahashi, of course, I'm curious about what is your opinion about the description presented by Ambassador Luis Augusto as China as a stabilizing factor in the region. But I'm also interested in knowing what is the prevalent opinion among Japanese elite, corporate elite, the military elite, about what China represents to the region. whether it is a stabilizing factor, a growth driver, or a destabilizing factor? What is the prevalent point of view among Japanese elites when it comes to China? As you put it, a neighbor and a driver of growth to the Japanese economy.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you very much, Sergio-san, on that point. And I think, for corporate elites here in town, China is still source of growth. I don't say they see China as a stability seeker, because they, like other countries' corporate leaders, they have some frustrations over Chinese government's interference to the market. And they also have big frustration on unfair practice of trade policy by Chinese government. But still, corporate leaders in general keep very high interest on Chinese market and to work with Chinese companies for their own growth. This is a problem for some people, but this is also the reality, right? United States or Europe or Japan are not the only center of growth, right? Actually, China is one very significant center of growth, right? And innovation. So corporate leaders, scientists, engineers, they are naturally attracted by such a big growth on China, even though they have big frustration altogether, right? But for policy elites in Japan and also military elites in Japan, China's behavior in maritime security or in general is the problem or concerns, right? Because, okay, I understand, they say, China try to say, they try to stabilize the region, and they don't have big interest in reforming the international order, but they don't take their words as they say, right? So, and like looking around, they say this is very military elite perspective, but over last 13 years or 14 years, People Liberation Army's behavior in Asia is more aggressive or assertive, at least, in maritime sphere, or even in cyber and space. So they start to have a seeds of distrust on Chinese counterparts. So this is a very important fact. And for policy elites now in town, their frustrations on Chinese style of governance and human rights abuse start to arise. So I think, policy elites, corporate elites, military elites, they have their own opinions, and they are so different to each other. But at least, yeah, please.
Now let me piggyback on the issue of military investment on defense and security, which is a subject raised by Alexandre Oshima. This perception about China among the policymakers in general and military people in particular, is this creating pressure to the increasing of resources spent on the military in Japan? Has this become a central issue in the domestic agenda in Japan?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and thank you very much for Oshima-san for this question too. And as you may know, in the last general election, LDP, the ruling party in Japan, in their manifesto, policy platform, they suggest Japan double its defense budget. But it is very interesting. They say they didn't have any timeline for, how could we double or up our defense budget. As you know, our defense budget is now under 1% of our GDP, gross domestic products, and not so big. China, Korea, United States, and many other countries spend far more than 1% of GDP. 2% of GDP is actually the NATO countries try to have, and United States always ask NATO countries try to keep 2% of GDP for defense budget. I think, Japanese government and taxpayers might agree to increase defense budget gradually, but I still cannot imagine 2% GDP, 2% of GDP will be spent on national defense in a decade, right? Maybe slight increase, several percent increase every year, say 2%, 3%, but still, it will not change big things. I mean, the defense budget will be still, around 1%, maybe 1.2% of GDP. So it means, Japan, only Japan cannot keep or balance of power against China in this region. Mm-hmm. So for Japan, the answer is the alliance with United States and also teaming up with other countries.
Which other countries specifically? South Korea is an important Japanese alliance. In spite of the liabilities, there are still sticking points in their relation.
But I think in pure military sense, Australia is the first pick. And the second pick might be UK. And I think with South Korea, actually, I ideally want to see the more military cooperation between South Korea and Japan. This is my position in public and in private sense too, of course. But, with historical baggage, it is very difficult on both sides. But let me clear just one thing. Military elites on South Korea, at least, are really open for military cooperation with Japanese SDF. The problem is the top leaders between two countries. Right? This is very politician-driven problems.
Mm-hmm. Interesting point. We are approaching the end of our conversation. I would like to hand it over back to Ambassador Luis Augusto for, and there is a very interesting and provocative question asked by Paulo Pinto, a Brazilian, of course. He wants you, Ambassador Luis Augusto, to define what does stability mean for China?
Well, I would try to reply to that question, but as a matter of fact, that would be up to the Chinese to define what their concept of stability is. But anyway, the stability, I think, everywhere is in the situation in which the rules of the game are stable, in which there is a certain predictability. If I do that, this will happen or that will happen. And I suppose, for instance, that is the concept of stability that the Japanese use. For them, Japan is a stability seeker because they are progressing. They are a fully developed country. They are, the Japanese society is very happy with the present situation in the country. It's a very democratic country as such. And I think that the Chinese leadership are satisfied with the present international order, with minor adjustments according to their thoughts. Because the current international order was the one that permitted China to have a spectacular growth and to enable the Chinese people to live with levels of prosperity that they have never seen throughout their history. So therefore, the idea of stability is, and I would quote perhaps Deng Xiaoping, who said that the main purpose of China, the main strategic goal of China, is to promote their insertion in the international system using, and then there's another problem of definition, using this market socialism with Chinese characteristics, whatever that means. But anyway, that's the point. That's the idea of the stability. It's a game that you know the rules, and you know that they won't change the rules according to specific facts.
So, Luis Augusto, if I may, would it be correct to summarize your your statements in the following way: that China is okay with the current global order, with the caveat that they want some minor adjustments, one, and two, that you don't see anything dramatic happening in the Taiwan Strait in the short and midterm? Is that correct?
Yes, I don't think it is in the best interest of the People's Republic of China to take a unilateral measures vis-a-vis Taiwan. It would be a catastrophic for both sides, for East Asia, and for the international relations as a whole. So I think that the present situation for them, perhaps not the best. It would require, as I said, adjustments from the Chinese point of view, but is whatever they can get now.
All right. If you allow me, Luis Augusto, let us hand the mic over to Professor Sahashi for concluding remarks. And let me once again provoke you, Professor Sahashi. Do you agree with the picture depicted by Ambassador Luis Augusto, that China is okay, satisfied with the global order, provided some minor adjustments are made, or you're more concerned about the way China is? Luis Augusto, you want to add something?
Yeah, minor in the Chinese view. For other Asian countries, they are not minor.
All right, I got it. Okay, okay. And so your take on that, Professor Sahashi, and these are your concluding remarks.
This is very interesting question. And I don't deny Chinese government try to adjust its behavior in some sphere, like in environmental protection, for global governance. But I think generally it is very difficult to predict China will be satisfied with the current international order with some modification, right? That is not Chinese own interest. And I think, I really try to keep some hopes. Chinese government will change their minds in their behaviors. But I think at this moment, I'm very pessimistic about the future. The China may not be satisfied with slight modification of international order. And they try to sit in the very center of the order in coming decades. So if they keep that foreign policy, the future I will look as very pessimistic. But I think, we have to take into consideration another factor. We do predict as such because China is keep growing now, right? But after 10 years or after 20 years, I think the growth of China might be suspended. In that case, I think international order, they cannot change by their hosts, or even, with other Asian people, other Asian countries, that might not be sufficient to change the order. So I think we do discussion now on China with a strong conviction, China will keep growing. But I think, after 10 years or 20 years, I think the situation might be very different. So, and at this moment, but for now, I think the most important thing is China try to resist the international order as it is. But our interest is lying with keeping the rule and norms of international order. But let me clear finally just one thing. This does not mean we have to live with American ideas always, right? This is totally different from what I say. Not only China, but also United States try to abuse international economic rules now, for example, right? We have to resist, but what we can, like Brazil, Japan, and other countries can rely on is rule-based international order, right? If not, without it, we cannot, protect our interest and our value. So this is my way of thinking, and thank you very much. And thank you very much for many questions, from the floor. And I'm very sorry I cannot answer to them, but excellent question on Taiwan. And this is very interesting, but just one sentence. We have, the government of Japan have not decided yet on the detail of how they behave in Taiwan contingency. So you will take a look in the future.
All right. There are many more questions to be asked here. So this is a clear sign that this event was a success, that we might hold another one on the same subject, because the interest here in Brazil is, I would say, well, exaggerating a little bit, huge. More than 60, 70 people stayed until the very last minute with us. I presume some of them are hungry because it's dinner time in Brazil. So I wish you good dinners. And it's been a great privilege for me to moderate such an interesting dialogue between you, Luis Augusto, Ambassador Luis Augusto, and you, Professor Sahashi. Thank you so much in the name of Fundação Fernando Henrique Cardoso. And I hope you stay safe. And Professor Sahashi, next time you come to Brazil, COVID permitting, come to Fundação Fernando Henrique Cardoso. We would love to hold an in-person talk with you there.
Thank you very much. I really want to do that. Yeah.
All right.